"Nobody move," the man at the gate said, and his voice was low enough that it should not have carried across the entire courtyard, yet every single person standing in that open space went completely still. Sarah Voss had been carrying a wooden bucket filled with ash and water, preparing to scrub the stones near the east wall the way she did every third morning before the sun reached its full height, and even she stopped. Her hands tightened around the rope handle of the bucket. Her eyes did not go to the gate the way everyone else's did. She had learned long ago that looking at things that did not concern her was one of the fastest ways to draw attention she could not afford. But she heard it. She heard everything, even without a manifested wolf, even without the enhanced senses that marked real pack members as something more than ordinary. She heard the sound that followed the man's warning, and it was unlike anything she had encountered in all her 23 years of living on the edges of the Voss clan territory. It was not a growl exactly. It was deeper than that. It was a sound that seemed to come from somewhere beneath the ground itself, a vibration that moved through the soles of her feet and up through her spine and settled in the back of her teeth like the pressure before a storm breaks open the sky. She set the bucket down. She did it slowly, without thinking, the way her body sometimes made decisions before her mind caught up. The stone courtyard of the Voss clan house stretched about 30 meters from the main gate to the entrance of the Great Hall, and every person in that space, warriors with years of training, omegas like herself who had learned to make themselves invisible, even the 2 elder council members who had been speaking near the water basin, every single one of them had turned toward the gate with expressions that ranged from awe to barely concealed terror. Sarah finally looked. The Alpha King Cade Duskmore walked through the gate like a man who had never once in his life considered the possibility that he might be unwelcome anywhere. He was taller than she had expected. The stories said he was imposing, but the stories, she was learning in this particular moment, were significant understatements. He wore dark riding clothes, nothing ceremonial, nothing that announced his rank except for the silver signet at his right hand, that caught the morning light with a cold, precise flash. His hair was dark and somewhat longer than was fashionable for men of his position, and his face was the kind of face that made people instinctively lower their gaze, not because he demanded it, but because something in the arrangement of his features communicated a level of self-possession that felt almost uncomfortable to look at directly. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a handful of years older, and he moved with the particular economy of motion that belonged to men who had spent their lives in genuine combat, rather than ceremonial display. Behind him came 4 guards, all of them massive, all of them scanning the courtyard with professional thoroughness. And beside him, not leashed, not restrained in any visible way, padding across the stone on paws the size of dinner plates, was the creature. Sarah had heard of the Shadow Panther. Everyone in every territory connected to the Duskmore crown had heard of the Shadow Panther. The stories were old and layered with the particular embellishment that attached itself to things people feared too much to describe accurately. The creature was real. She understood that now in a way that stories had never quite managed to convey. It was enormous, easily the height of her waist at the shoulder, its coat so deeply black that it seemed to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it, creating a shape that was simultaneously present and somehow less than solid. Its eyes were the color of banked coals, orange gold and burning with an intelligence that had no business existing in an animal. It moved beside the Alpha King with the casual confidence of a predator that had never once encountered something it could not destroy. And as it cleared the gate and entered the full space of the courtyard, every wolf in that space took a step back. Some of them did it consciously. Most of them did it the way prey animals move away from fire, without choosing to, simply responding to something ancient and instinctual that lived beneath all the social structures they had built around themselves. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. The Shadow Panther's head turned. It turned in the specific, deliberate way of a creature that has identified something interesting. And Sarah realized with a cold, slow shock that moved through her like ice water that it was looking at her. Not at the warriors. Not at the elders who represented the only authority in this space that might have warranted attention. It was looking at her. Sarah Voss, who was nobody. Sarah Voss, who had spent the better part of a decade perfecting the art of occupying space without being noticed. Sarah Voss, who was holding a bucket of ash water and had absolutely no explanation for why a mythological creature of terrifying power had just fixed its burning gaze on her face and was now, with a slowness that seemed almost deliberate, beginning to move toward her. "Do not," one of the guards said sharply, and his hand went to the weapon at his side, but the Alpha King raised one hand without looking at the guard, and the man stopped immediately, going rigid with the particular attentiveness of someone who has learned through painful experience to respond to that gesture without question or delay. Cade Duskmore was watching the Panther, and then, with an expression Sarah could not read from this distance, he was watching her. The Panther crossed the courtyard. It did not rush. It moved the way large cats move. When they are not hunting, with a loose-jointed, rolling grace that was almost hypnotic to watch. And it crossed the 30 meters between the gate and the east wall, where Sarah stood without paying any attention whatsoever to the 50 or so pack members who scrambled and pressed themselves backward to clear its path. It stopped in front of her. It was so close that she could feel the warmth radiating off its coat, could smell it. Something wild and cold and ancient, like deep forest at midwinter. Its head was level with her chest. It looked up at her with those burning eyes and made a sound, very low, very soft, nothing like the thunder of the sound it had made entering the gate. This sound was almost gentle. It was the kind of sound that a creature makes when it has found something it recognizes. Sarah did not think. If she had thought, she would have done the sensible thing, which was to step back, to lower her gaze, to make herself small and invisible in the way she had spent years practicing. Instead, she lifted her free hand, the one not holding the bucket, and she placed it very carefully on the top of the Panther's enormous head. The fur was not what she expected. It was softer than she had imagined, underneath the dense outer layer, and warmer than the cold morning air should have allowed. The Panther closed its eyes. It made that low sound again, deeper this time, resonating in its chest, and it folded itself down onto the stones at her feet with the unhurried deliberateness of a creature choosing to be at rest, and it laid its great head against her feet and went still. The courtyard was completely silent. Sarah became aware, slowly, of approximately 50 pairs of eyes staring at her with expressions she had never in her life seen directed at herself. Shock. Bewilderment. Something else. Something that on some faces looked uncomfortably close to fear. She became aware also of a single pair of eyes that was different from the rest, darker, and steadier, and carrying something she could not name. The Alpha King was watching her, and his expression was not shock or bewilderment. It was the expression of a man who has just encountered a piece of information that does not fit any framework he currently possesses, and who is taking the time to decide what to do with that. "What is your name?" he said. His voice was not loud. It carried anyway. Sarah swallowed. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Voss." He looked at her for another moment. "Does he do that often?" he said. And there was something in the way he said it, something very carefully controlled, that made her think the question was far more significant than it sounded. "I have never met him before today," she said. Cade Duskmore held her gaze for 3 full seconds, which felt, in the charged silence of that courtyard, like considerably longer. Then he looked away, and the courtyard began to breathe again. The Voss clan chief was named Roland Voss, and he was Sarah's father's. Second cousin, which made him family in the technical sense while making absolutely clear through every interaction across her entire lifetime that he considered her the kind of family one acknowledged at ceremonies and otherwise ignored. He was a heavy-set man with the particular combination of natural authority and cultivated arrogance that marked men who had held power long enough to forget what it felt like not to have it. He came across the courtyard with his arms already spreading in the gesture of welcome. That was 3 parts genuine relief that the Alpha King had actually arrived, and 1 part performance for the assembled pack. He was talking before he had covered half the distance, something elaborate about the honor of the visit and the excellence of the preparations that had been made. And Sarah watched his eyes slide past her, as if she were not standing 3 feet from the most significant creature any of them had ever seen. As if the Shadow Panther had not just crossed an entire courtyard to lie down at her feet. She picked up her bucket of ash water. She turned and walked toward the east wall. Behind her, she heard the Alpha King exchange formal greetings with Roland, heard the careful dance of political language beginning, and she focused on the wall in front of her and the work that needed doing, and told herself very firmly that whatever had just happened was not something she needed to understand. The Shadow Panther did not follow her. She checked, once, over her shoulder, and saw it had remained sitting in the middle of the courtyard, watching her departure with those burning eyes, ignoring everyone else entirely. She turned back to the wall. She dipped her brush and began to scrub. Lena Ashford found her before the midday meal. This was not a surprise. Lena had a gift for finding Sarah at moments of vulnerability with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent years practicing the skill, and the morning's events had created a vulnerability that Lena would have sensed from the other side of the territory. She was beautiful, in the way that expensive things were beautiful, polished and precise, and assembled with obvious care. Her hair was the color of pale wheat, and she wore it in elaborate arrangements that somehow always looked effortless. Her clothes were always the exact correct level of fine for any given occasion. She had been raised to be the perfect political mate for a man of significant power, and she had learned the lessons with the thoroughness of a student who understood that her entire future depended on the grade. She stood in the doorway of the storage room where Sarah had retreated to return her cleaning supplies, and she looked at Sarah the way she always looked at Sarah, with a kind of cool, assessing contempt that never quite became open enough to be actionable. "That was interesting this morning," Lena said. Her voice was pleasant. It was always pleasant in the way that things designed to cause harm, while maintaining deniability were pleasant. "I am returning the brushes," Sarah said. She kept her voice neutral. She had years of practice at this, too. "Of course you are." Lena stepped inside the storage room. The space was small, and Lena was very good at using physical proximity as a form of pressure, without ever doing anything that could be described as a threat. "Everyone is talking about it. Do you know what they are saying?" "I expect they are saying various things," Sarah said. She placed the brushes on their shelf in the correct order. She had learned to be very precise about putting things back where they belonged. "They are saying it is strange," Lena said. "An Omega with no wolf, no rank, no particular value to the pack. And the Alpha King's creature goes to her like a pet going to its favorite person." She paused, and Sarah could feel the weight of what was coming in the particular quality of that pause. "Some people might find that suspicious. Some people might wonder what someone like you could possibly have done to make a creature like that respond that way." Sarah turned around. She looked at Lena directly, which she did not always do, because direct eye contact with Lena felt like a game Lena had been playing longer and with more preparation. "I did not do anything," she said. "It walked to me. I have no explanation for that." "No," Lena said, and she smiled, and the smile was the kind that did not involve her eyes at all. "I imagine you do not. That is almost more worrying, is it not? When things happen around someone, and that person cannot explain why." She let the implication settle for a moment. the way a person places a glass down very carefully. I would be careful, Sarah. The Alpha King is here for important reasons. Political reasons. He does not need distractions. And I think you have been a distraction long enough already. Do you not think? She left. Sarah stood in the storage room and breathed carefully and slowly, and did not allow herself to feel the particular cold that Lena's words always left behind. The spreading chill of being reminded, with exquisite precision, of everything she was not and would never be. The evening meal was a formal affair in the Great Hall. Sarah did not attend formal affairs in the Great Hall. She ate in the kitchen with the house staff and the lower-ranked Omegas, as she had always done. And she was fine with this, had made her peace with this arrangement years ago, or at least had constructed something that functioned like peace when she did not look at it too closely. She was helping clear the serving platters when one of Roland's personal attendants came into the kitchen with an expression of barely contained bewilderment and said, "Sarah Voss, you are wanted in the Great Hall." She looked at him. "I think there must be a mistake," she said. "There is not a mistake," he said, and his bewilderment deepened. "The Alpha King asked for you specifically by name." The kitchen went very quiet. Sarah was aware of every pair of eyes in the room finding her, and she thought, with the exhausted clarity of someone who has had a very long day, that apparently today was not finished with her yet. She did not have fine clothes. She had good working clothes, and slightly less worn versions of those for occasions that required minimal presentation. And she wore the best of what she had when she walked into the Great Hall, and felt the weight of 24 stairs shifting to find her the moment she appeared in the doorway. The long table was still set with the remnants of the formal meal. Roland sat at its head with the careful stillness of a man performing composure. Lena sat 3 seats down in a dress the color of winter frost, and her face was a masterwork of controlled expression. The Alpha King sat to Roland's right, and he was the only person in the room who did not look at Sarah when she entered with any kind of readable reaction. He was in conversation with one of his advisors. He finished the sentence he was saying before he turned. "Sarah Voss," he said. "Sit." He indicated the chair to his left, which was empty, which was the chair reserved in most pack traditions for someone of particular significance. Sarah watched Roland's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly from across the table. She sat. "I want to know," Cade Duskmore said, and his voice was the same as it had been in the courtyard, not loud, carrying completely. "What you know about your lineage." Sarah blinked. Of all the things she had constructed anxious expectations about on the walk from the kitchen to this room, that question had not appeared among them. "My lineage," she said. "Your family line. Specifically your mother's side." He was watching her with that same quality of attention from the courtyard, focused and entirely without social pretense, as if the question was simply a question, and the answer was simply information he wanted. "My mother died when I was 4, Sarah said carefully. "I know very little about her family. I was raised here by the clan." She paused. "By Roland's household." The particular quality of that pause communicated everything that needed to be communicated about the nature of that upbringing, without saying anything that could be taken as complaint. Something moved across the Alpha King's face. It was brief, controlled, and she could not name it. "And your wolf," he said. "Have you always been without a manifested form?" The table had gone very still. This was the question that had defined her entire existence within the clan, the absence at the center of her identity, the reason for her rank, her exclusion, her invisibility. She had been asked it before with cruelty, with pity, with the particular clinical detachment of pack elders evaluating whether she represented a liability. She had never been asked it by anyone who seemed to be asking, because the answer genuinely mattered, as information rather than as social data. "Yes," she said. "Always." She hesitated because there was something else, something she had never told anyone, because there had never been anyone to tell, and because the telling had always felt like offering a weapon to someone who would use it. But there was something about the directness of his attention that made the usual defenses feel less necessary. "I feel it," she said. "There is something there. I have always felt it. But it does not manifest. It is like a door that is locked from the other side." The Alpha King was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long has Calder been in this territory?" Calder. The Shadow Panther had a name. Sarah had not known that, had not thought to wonder, and the intimacy of knowing it, the way it shifted the creature from mythological force to something almost personal, created an odd sensation somewhere beneath her sternum. "I do not know," she said. "He arrived with you this morning." "He arrived with me," Kate agreed. "But he was aware of this territory before we came. He has been restless for 3 weeks, since we passed through the Thornwood border." He paused. "The Thornwood border is the edge of the Voss clan's territory." Sarah looked at him. He looked back at her. The silence between them was different from the silence of the room around them, which was the strained silence of people trying to become furniture. The silence between them was the kind that contained things not yet spoken. "What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below." "I do not know what that means," she said, though she was beginning to, in the vague, unsettling way that understanding sometimes arrived before it was welcome. "Neither do I yet," he said, "but I intend to find out." He reached for his cup, and his eyes moved briefly to Lena down the table, and then back to Sarah. And there was something in that glance, quick and assessing, that told her he had noted the dynamic in this room with the accuracy of a man accustomed to reading political landscapes at a glance. "You will join the morning meal tomorrow," he said to Sarah, "and you will stay available during my visit." Roland spoke for the first time, very smoothly, with the tone of a man inserting himself into a negotiation before it could proceed further without him. "Of course, any member of the household is available to assist the king's party during the visit. I will ensure that Sarah is assigned to support duties that keep her accessible." "Support duties," Cade said. His voice did not change. It did not need to. He simply repeated the phrase and let it sit in the air between them, and Roland heard what was in it, what everyone at that table heard, which was a man with absolute authority, gently demonstrating his awareness of a reclassification being attempted, and his disinterest in it. "As a guest," Cade said. "She will join us as a guest." Sarah walked back to the kitchen. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat was not. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the narrow bed in the small room that had been hers since she was old enough to be given one, listening to the nighttime sounds of the clan house, the distant call of a night bird, the creak of old timber settling, the occasional far-off sound of a sentry changing position. Her room was on the east side of the building, and through the single small window she could see the corner of the courtyard where she had stood that morning. She found herself thinking about the warmth of the panther's head beneath her hand, the extraordinary softness of that coat, the sound it had made when it lay down at her feet. She found herself thinking about the locked door inside herself, the thing she had stopped talking about, because talking about it had only ever brought her more of what she already had too much of, which was the particular pity that people directed at someone they had already written off. She thought about what he had said. Calder had been restless since the Thornwood border, 3 weeks ago. She had spent the last 3 weeks the same as every other week of her adult life, working and invisible and making herself small. And apparently something had been paying attention to her from the other side of a territorial border without her knowledge. The thought was strange. The thought was also, beneath its strangeness, something else. Something that felt dangerously close to the emotion she had trained herself most carefully not to feel. Because hope was the cruelest of the things she could not afford. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She told herself firmly and practically that whatever was happening, Whatever coincidence or mysterious supernatural alignment had caused a legendary creature to take an interest in her existence, the most likely outcome was that it would be investigated and explained, and she would return to her bucket and her brushes and her invisible life, and the best thing she could do was manage her expectations accordingly. She was almost asleep when she heard it. Outside her window, very close, that low resonant sound, the same sound from the courtyard, the sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a purr, but something in between that operated below the register of ordinary sound and was felt more than heard. She sat up. She crossed to the window and looked out. Calder sat in the courtyard below, enormous and black against the pale stone, looking up at her window with those burning coal-fire eyes. He made the sound again when he saw her face appear, and then he settled himself down on the stones with the massive deliberateness of a creature making itself comfortable, and he stayed there. He was there when she finally fell asleep. He was still there when she woke before dawn, sitting in the same spot, patient as stone. The morning meal was a revelation in the sociology of power. Sarah had observed pack hierarchies from the outside her entire life, had catalogued them with the particular attentiveness of someone whose survival depended on understanding social landscapes she was not permitted to navigate. Watching those same hierarchies reshape themselves in real time around a single fixed point, which was the Alpha King's apparent interest in her, was a different kind of education. The people who had ignored her for years were now careful around her. Careful in the way people were careful with things they were not sure about, which was a category she had never previously occupied. The warriors who had looked through her for a decade now looked at her with the same professional assessment they directed at potential threats. The female pack members around Lena's position in the social order had shifted into the particular formation of women who are managing an unexpected complication, watching Sarah with a focused attention that had the quality of calculation. Lena herself was a masterpiece. She was present and gracious, and warmly social in the way that only someone with complete confidence in their position could manage, and she made sure to be seated near the Alpha King, and she directed 3 conversations in his direction, with the ease of a woman who had been practicing that exact social maneuver her entire adult life, and she did not look at Sarah at all, which was its own kind of statement. Cade Duskmore ate his meal, and spoke with Roland about territorial matters, and listened more than he spoke, and twice he asked Sarah a direct question across the table, once about the geography of the eastern border, and once about the history of a particular dispute she had not expected him to know she knew anything about. The second time she answered, she saw Roland's eyes flicker with something that was not quite surprise and not quite resentment, but lived in the uncomfortable territory between them. The look of a man realizing that someone he had defined as insignificant has been paying close attention for years. After the meal, the Alpha King said that he wished to walk the territory boundary. He took 2 guards, and without particular ceremony, indicated that Sarah should come. She went. Lena watched her go with an expression that had not changed in any observable way, and yet communicated volumes to anyone capable of reading the specific frequency on which Lena Ashford transmitted her most dangerous communications. The eastern boundary of the Voss territory ran along a ridge line above a river valley, and the morning was cold and clear with the particular sharpness of early autumn, and Calder walked between them with the easy stride of a creature entirely at home in open terrain. Sarah had thought the Alpha King would ask more questions about lineage or about her wolf, but he walked for almost 10 minutes without speaking, and she found, with mild surprise, that the silence was not uncomfortable. She had spent most of her life uncomfortable in silence with powerful people, because silence with powerful people usually meant something was being decided about her. This was different. This felt like the silence of someone simply occupying the same space. "How long have you lived in Roland's household?" he said finally. "Since I was 4, she said. "When my mother died." "Your father?" "I never knew him." She paused. "I was told he was from another territory, that he left before I was born." Cade was quiet for a moment. They had reached the ridge, and below them the river moved with the silver quickness of cold water catching light. "What do you know about the Voss bloodline's original lineage?" he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the valley below. "The official history says the clan was founded by Aldo Voss 3 generations ago," she said. "The official history," he said. And there was something in the way he said it, a very subtle emphasis on the word official, that told her he knew it was incomplete. "There are older stories," she said carefully. She had collected those stories the way she collected everything that might help her understand what she was and what she was not. Stories about the territory before the Voss clan, about a bloodline that held this land before the current hierarchy, a lineage connected to something older than pack law. She paused. "They are not stories that get told in the Great Hall." "No," he agreed. "They would not be." He turned and looked at her, and his gaze was direct in the way it always was, without the usual social softening that people applied when they were going to say something significant. "There is a record in the Crown Archive, older than the Voss clan by 4 generations. It describes a family line in this territory with a particular characteristic, a bloodline that carries a dormant power, one that does not manifest in the conventional way but is present nonetheless, a power that certain creatures, those old enough and perceptive enough, can detect even when it is not active." He paused. "Calder is approximately 400 years old." Sarah was quiet. The wind moved through the valley below them, and the river went on being silver and quick and indifferent to revelations. "The bloodline was believed to have ended," Cade continued. "The records suggest it was deliberately suppressed. A political decision made 3 generations ago to consolidate power in a simpler hierarchy." He was watching her with that steady, focused attention. "I began researching this when Calder became agitated at the Thornwood border. I had never seen him respond to a location that way. I pulled the archive records during our travel here." He paused again, and what was in the pause was not uncertainty exactly, but something that in a less contained man might have been called wonder. "The family name in the archive is not Voss." "What is it?" she said. Her voice was very even. "Vail," he said. "The Vail line. Ancient enough that most of the surviving records are in old script. Vail." The word landed somewhere deep inside her, in the vicinity of that locked door, and the door did not open, but something shifted against it, some pressure from the inside that she had never felt before, that sent a tremor through her so subtle that it would not have been visible to anyone watching, but that she felt from her fingertips to the back of her throat. Calder, walking at her left, stopped walking. He turned his great head and looked at her, and his nostrils flared and he made a sound, that resonant, deep sound, and then he pressed the side of his enormous head against her hip with a gentleness that was startlingly at odds with his size. "Yes," Cade said quietly, watching the panther. "He feels it too." Sarah placed her hand on Calder's head. Her fingers were trembling slightly, and she did not try to stop them because there was no audience here except the Alpha King, and 2 guards who were very professionally looking at the valley, and she was beyond caring in this particular moment about the performance of composure. "What does it mean?" she said. "Practically, if the bloodline record is accurate, what does it mean for me?" Cade was quiet for a moment that felt considered. "It means the power you have been feeling your entire life is real, and was always real, and what has been keeping it locked is not a deficiency in you, but a deliberate suppression that was applied to this bloodline at a political level 3 generations ago, and has been maintained since." He said it straightforwardly, the way he said everything, and the straightforwardness of it, the complete absence of preamble or cushioning, was so unlike every other conversation she had ever had about what she was and was not, that she felt it move through her like something releasing. "It also means," he continued, "that the question of your status within this clan has been constructed on a false foundation, which is something I intend to address." She looked at him. He was looking at the valley again, his profile clean and still against the autumn sky. She thought about what it would mean for someone in his position to say something like that. To say it simply, and without qualifications, as though it were a straightforward matter of fact. And she thought about all the years of careful smallness she had built around herself. And she thought about the locked door and the pressure against it that was getting stronger. And she said the most honest thing she could find to say in this moment. "You do not know me," she said. "You arrived yesterday. He..." Turned and looked at her again. "Calder has known you for 3 weeks," he said. "From the other side of a territorial border. He knew you before I saw your face." He paused. "Calder does not make mistakes." The afternoon brought complications, as afternoons in political situations tended to do. Lena arrived at Roland's study, while the Alpha King was in a boundary negotiation meeting, and she arrived with 3 other women of the clan's inner circle, and she was carrying a folded document with the practiced casualness of someone who has prepared a move they want to appear spontaneous. Sarah was crossing the corridor outside the study when the group came around the corner, and the particular configuration of their approach, 5 against 1 in a narrow hallway, had the choreography of something planned. "Sarah," Lena said, with the warmth of a woman greeting an old friend in a social setting. "We were hoping to find you. We wanted to talk." She paused. "About this morning." Sarah stopped. She was tired. She was thinking about everything the Alpha King had said, and she had been composing and discarding questions she did not know who to ask, and she did not have the particular reserves of energy that managing Lena typically required. "All right," she said. Lena unfolded the document. "This is a copy of the assignment records for the Alpha King's visit. Roland prepared them this morning, after the meal. You have been officially listed as an attendant assigned to the King's party. A service attendant." She said it with the careful neutrality of someone stating a fact, which was how Lena delivered her most pointed attacks, dressed in the language of simple information. "Roland thought it would be helpful for you to have clarity about your role during the visit, given the confusion." The confusion. Sarah looked at the document. Her name was there, and her assignment was listed as service support, which was the designation for people who carried things and cleaned things and did not sit at tables. She thought about the morning meal, about the 2 direct questions across the table, about the Alpha King's voice saying as a guest. "I see," she said. "It is better this way," one of the other women said gently, in the tone of someone offering kindness. "For everyone. You understand." Sarah folded the document and handed it back to Lena. "I understand," she said. "Excuse me." She walked. She did not know where she was walking until she found herself outside, in the open air of the eastern side of the building, in the courtyard where it had begun that morning, and she stood there in the cold afternoon light, and she let herself feel what she was feeling, which was not defeat exactly, but something in the same family, the particular exhaustion of someone who has spent a very long time pushing against a wall, and has just been reminded that the wall has not moved. She breathed. She breathed again. She thought about the locked door and the pressure behind it that had been building since the morning, stronger every hour, as if something was responding to being named. She thought about Calder sleeping at her feet on cold stone. She thought about a bloodline 3 generations suppressed. She thought about the Alpha King's voice, completely level, saying what has been keeping it locked is not a deficiency in you. She was still standing there when Cade Duskmore walked out of the building behind her. He did not ask why she was there. He stood beside her for a moment, looking at the same courtyard stones, and then he said, "Roland gave you the attendant assignment." "Yes," she said. "I see." A pause. "He will find that it has been rescinded." She turned to look at him. He was looking forward, his expression unreadable in the way it was often unreadable, not because it was blank, but because it was dense with something that did not translate easily into the kind of surface emotions people usually wore visibly. You cannot simply rescind it, she said. He is the clan chief. You are a guest. I am the Alpha King, he said. And there was no arrogance in it, no inflation. It was simply a statement of fact, the way that the sky was the sky, and the stone was the stone. And this territory is under the Duskmore crown. Roland's authority within this clan is real. His authority to contradict a direct designation made by the crown is not. He paused. I should have made the designation more explicit at the morning meal. I did not, and that was an oversight. I will correct it. She was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was long and golden and cold, and it caught the edge of his jaw and the silver of the signet at his hand. Why, she said. Not what or how, but why. Why does it matter to you what Roland designates me? He turned to look at her. His eyes were very dark, almost black in some lights, and there was something in them in this particular light, the long gold of a late autumn afternoon, that she had not seen there before, or perhaps had not been close enough to see. Because it is not accurate, he said, and I do not tolerate inaccurate designations in my crown's territory. A pause. And because Calder has not slept inside the keep since we arrived. He spent the night in the courtyard outside your window. She looked at him and felt the thing she had warned herself about feeling, that warm and terrifying thing, moving through her with no regard for her warnings. What does that mean? She said quietly. Calder in. The courtyard. What does it mean in terms of the bond or the connection? What does the ancient record say about it? He was quiet for a long moment, and in that moment she could see him deciding how much to say, which was unusual because he had seemed so far to be a person who said what he meant without particular deliberation. The Vale bloodline, he said carefully, is described in the archive as having a specific relationship with certain bound creatures. Creatures that are themselves very old. The relationship is described in the old texts as recognition. The creature recognizes a person carrying the bloodline the way you would recognize your own name spoken aloud. Not because of training or choice, but because it simply is. He paused. The records also describe the bond that forms between a person of Vale blood and the creature's bonded companion. She was very still. The creature's bonded companion, she said. He held her gaze. The archive is several centuries old, he said. The language of that time was not indirect about such things. He paused, and something in his expression shifted, very slightly. Something that was the most human expression she had seen on his face, and that looked, beneath its controlled exterior, like a man standing at the edge of something much larger than he had planned for. I have spent my adult life bonded to Calder. I have never found the other half of what the old texts describe. I had concluded the bloodline was extinguished. I paused again. I stopped looking approximately 5 years ago. The silence was very complete. The long golden afternoon held still around them. And then 3 weeks ago, she said. And then 3 weeks ago, he agreed. If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. She did not know how long they stood there in the quiet courtyard. The light shifted, slowly, from gold to the first cool gray of approaching evening, and neither of them spoke, and it was not an uncomfortable silence, but the particular silence of two people processing something too large to immediately clothe in words. Calder appeared at some point from the shadows at the far side of the courtyard and padded across to them and settled himself between them, with the unhurried satisfaction of a creature presiding over something it had arranged itself and was pleased with. Sarah looked down at him and felt the locked door tremble, that pressure from the inside becoming something close to urgent, and she breathed carefully and slowly and told herself that whatever was happening, whatever ancient bloodline and 400-year-old creature and archive records were converging toward, she needed to remain herself inside it. Not be swept into someone else's story. Remain Sarah Voss, who was practical and careful and had learned very thoroughly how to survive. but also, she thought, Sarah Voss who might not be only what she had been told she was. The next 3 days had a particular quality she did not have a word for, an intensification of everything ordinary, as if the events of the morning had opened a lens somewhere, and everything seen through it was sharper and more saturated. She sat at the morning meal as a guest, and watched Roland manage his equilibrium with the expertise of a man long practiced in containing things he could not openly address. She walked the territory with the Alpha King on 2 more mornings, and they talked about the history of the land, and the nature of pack politics and the complexity of the crown's obligations to the various clans, and she discovered that talking to him was unlike talking to anyone she had encountered before, because he listened with full attention and responded with information rather than performance, and asked questions that told her he was genuinely interested in what she thought, rather than in what she was expected to think. She also discovered that being around him produced in her a physical awareness that she found both deeply inconvenient and impossible to ignore, a heightened sensitivity to proximity and warmth, and the particular quality of his voice when it dropped low, which it did sometimes, not deliberately, she thought, but simply because some things were easier to say quietly. Lena escalated. This was predictable, and Sarah had been watching for it with the careful attention of someone who had learned that the time between when Lena decided something and when she acted was usually short. It began with small things. Information circulated through the clan about Sarah's history, specifically and pointedly the parts of her history most easily weaponized: her wolfless status, her service rank, the years of basic labor that constituted her contribution to the clan. It circulated in the way information circulated when someone with social reach decided it needed to, casually but persistently, the way smoke moved through a building without anyone being able to identify the specific source. The Alpha King's advisors received it the way advisors received all social information, filing it and noting it, and certainly discussing it in terms of what it meant for their king's judgment and reputation. Sarah watched this happen and kept her expression neutral, and her movements steady, and refused to give Lena the visible distress that would have confirmed the strategy was working. Then, Lena did something more direct. On the 3rd evening, during a gathering in the Great Hall, that was formal enough for everyone of any significance in the clan to be present, Lena stood and said, with the composed authority of someone making a practical contribution to a discussion, that she believed the Alpha King deserved to know the full context of certain members of the household before forming associations that might prove diplomatically inconvenient. She said it beautifully, using the language of concern and care and practical service to the king's interests, and she spoke about Sarah's wolfless status and the questions it raised about lineage legitimacy, and the difficulty of verifying claims about bloodlines that conveniently appeared at politically significant moments. She was not cruel. She was the opposite of cruel. She was reasonable and measured and utterly devastating. The hall was quiet when she finished. Sarah sat at the table and felt the familiar cold moving through her, the cold of being evaluated and found insufficient, and she looked at her hands on the table and breathed and waited for the moment to pass the way she had waited for all such moments to pass, across all the years that had taught her this. Waiting was the only reliable skill she possessed. "Thank you, Lena," Cade Duskmore said. His voice was exactly as it always was, level and carrying. "Your concern is noted." He paused. "I have been aware of the questions you have raised since before my arrival. The archive research that led me to this territory was thorough." Another pause, and when he continued, there was something in his voice that was still perfectly level, but that had, beneath the level surface, the quality of a very large weight placed precisely and without hurry. "The bloodline question has been verified by Crown Archive records that predate the current Voss clan hierarchy by 4 generations. The suppressions that were applied to that bloodline have also been documented. Both findings have been entered into the official Crown record as of this morning." He looked at Lena directly, and it was a short look, not unkind, simply concluding. "The full context is indeed important. I am glad you agree." Lena sat down. Her expression did not change in any way that could be described, but something in her posture changed, very slightly, and Sarah, who had been studying Lena Ashford for years, saw it. The hall began to breathe again. Later, in the corridor, Cade fell into step beside her. He did not say anything for a moment, and neither did she. Then he said, "You all right?" She thought about the question. She thought about all the years of calibrated smallness and the locked door and the cold that Lena's words always left, and the fact that this time, for the first time in her memory, the cold had been interrupted before it could fully settle. "I am working on it," she said honestly. He walked beside her in the quiet corridor, and his shoulder was close to hers, and Calder patted at her left, and the three of them moved through the lamplight of the old building, and she thought, with the strange clarity of moments that later become the ones you remember, that she was not afraid. She had been afraid for so many years that the absence of it felt like a new kind of sense, one she did not quite know how to use yet. The ritual of the Black Moon came on the 7th night of the Alpha King's visit, as it came every 7 years, as the old calendar had always scheduled it since before the Voss clan existed to host it. The Black Moon ritual was not specific to any single pack. It was older than any current clan structure, a convergence that happened at the darkest moon of the autumn cycle, when the veil between what was known and what was true became thinner than at any other time, and the witnesses who gathered in a Black Moon circle were bound by laws older than any political arrangement to receive what the ritual revealed. It could not be manipulated. It could not be staged. It had ended political careers, settled inheritance disputes, dissolved false bonds, and confirmed true ones across more generations than any living wolf could count. Roland had known the ritual was coming when he invited the Alpha King, and the political calculations in that invitation were transparent to anyone who understood that Lena Ashford's best hope for confirming a crown alliance was through a Black Moon ceremony. What Roland had not calculated, because he could not have, was what the ritual would find when it encountered a Vale bloodline that had been suppressed for 3 generations, suddenly and actively pressured by proximity to its natural partner. Sarah stood in the circle, and she was terrified. She did not have practice being terrified in front of other people, had spent so long turning terror into the specific face of composed acceptance that she was not sure her face knew how to do terror anymore. But the circle was open to the sky, and the dark moon above it was absolute, not a sliver of light anywhere, and the air in the circle had that pressure to it that she had been feeling building for days, the pressure from the wrong side of the locked door, and her hands at her sides were shaking, very finely, and she was not trying to stop them because she did not have anything left to use for stopping them. Cade Duskmore stood in the circle too, 12 feet from her, with Calder at his side, and he was watching her across the dark space between them, and his expression was the most open she had seen it, that controlled surface moved aside for this particular moment, and what she could see underneath was something that looked like a man bracing himself for something he had wanted for a long time. The ritual elder began the words. They were in old script, and Sarah did not know the language, but she knew the sound of it. Knew it from somewhere that was not her memory, but was older and deeper than her memory, and the knowing of it produced a sensation she had no name for. Around the circle, the witnesses stood in silence. Lena was there. Roland was there. Calder sat between Sarah and Cade, and he was still as stone, and his eyes burned with their coal-fire light, and he was watching the space above Sarah's head. When the power came, it did not come the way she had expected power to come, with force or violence or the dramatic shattering of something breaking. It came like water, finding a channel that had been waiting for it, like light moving through a door that had finally been opened from the right side. It moved up through her from the ground, from somewhere beneath the stone of the circle, and it moved through her spine and into her chest, and the locked door did not so much open as dissolve, the lock simply ceasing to be, the door ceasing to be. the whole constructed barrier between her and what she was ceasing to be, as if it had never been anything but an absence of permission. She could feel her wolf. She could feel it the way you feel. A word you have been trying to remember suddenly become available, the whole shape of it present and real and waiting. It was not a small thing. It had been locked for 23 years, and it had been growing in the dark. And the size of it, the power of it, made her gasp with something that was not quite pain and not quite joy, but lived exactly at the line between the two. The witnesses gasped. She heard it, the simultaneous intake of breath from the entire circle, and she did not understand what they were seeing until she looked down at her hands and saw the light. It was silver white, and it was coming from her skin, and it was moving, not static, but alive, shifting in patterns that she recognized, distantly and certainly, as the same patterns that decorated the oldest stones of this territory, the ones carved before anyone currently living had been born. "Vile," the ritual elder said, and her voice was very quiet and very certain, and carried the particular quality of someone reading from a book they know by heart. Sarah looked across the circle at Cade Duskmore, and the light from her own skin was reflected in his dark eyes, and his expression was the expression of a man receiving something he had stopped believing he would ever receive, and it was unguarded in a way that she had not seen his face be before, and what it contained was so large and so simple that she felt it move through her like a second wave of the power still coursing through her body. Calder rose from his stillness. He rose, and he crossed the space between them, between her and Cade, and he stood between them, and he made the sound, the deep, resonant sound, and this time it was not gentle. This time it was declarative. It moved through the circle and through every body in it, and it said, in the wordless language of very old things, something that needed no translation. This, these two, this bond, this truth. Roland's face, when she allowed herself to see it, had the expression of a man doing complex and unwelcome arithmetic. Lena's face was a study in precise stillness. The witnesses around the circle had the expressions of people present at a historical event they had not expected to witness, the particular quality of attention that came from knowing that what was happening would be talked about for a very long time. Sarah turned back to Cade. He had crossed the space between them while she was looking at the witnesses, moving with that quiet, purposeful economy, and he was standing close, closer than he had stood in the courtyard or on the ridge or in the corridor, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold circle air, and he was looking at her with those dark eyes that had the light in them now. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was very low. It was not low in the controlled political way it usually was, but in the way of something essential being said in a space that felt private, despite the 50 witnesses surrounding them. "Yes," she said. "Calder knew first," he said. "He always knows. First. That is how it works, with the old bond." He paused, and she could see him navigating something. The careful man who said exactly what he meant, encountering something that the usual precision of language did not quite fit. "But I am not Calder. I am not responding to ancient bloodline recognition alone." Another pause. "I want to be clear about that." She looked at him, at the unguarded expression on that controlled face, and she felt something loosen in her chest, some last remaining piece of the careful smallness she had been building for 23 years. "I am also not responding to ancient bloodline recognition alone," she said quietly. He looked at her for a moment, and the corner of his mouth moved, very slightly, in something that was almost a smile, and she thought it was probably a rare thing. That almost smile, and the thought of it being directed at her produced a warmth in her sternum that the silver light of her power did nothing to explain. Calder sat down between them and leaned his enormous body against both their legs simultaneously and made a sound of deep and rumbling satisfaction. What followed was not simple. Nothing worth having ever arrived simply, and the Vale bloodline's return, the Crown's official documentation of it, the redistribution of status and recognition that followed, the necessary and uncomfortable conversations between the Alpha King and the Voss clan, leadership about what had been suppressed and why, and what restitution. Meant in practical terms, none of that was simple, or quick, or without difficulty. Roland negotiated with the dignity of a man who understood that his position remained intact, even as its foundations were being re-examined, and he was not without intelligence, made his accommodations with the grace of someone who had decided that accommodation was better than confrontation with the Crown's full authority. Lena left the territory on the 4th day after the ritual, and she did it with the composure. That had always been her most formidable quality, and Sarah watched her go and felt no triumph, only the particular quiet of something that no longer required energy to manage. The suppression itself took more than the ritual to fully undo. It had been applied across generations, and the untangling of it was a process that the Crown Archive scholars would work on for months with Sarah's participation. But the immediate and practical effect of the ritual's revelation was present from the morning. After, in the way that every interaction had shifted, in the way that people addressed her, in the way that the space she occupied within the clan house had quietly and irrevocably expanded from the narrow margin she had inhabited into something that fit the actual dimensions of who she was. Her wolf manifested for the first time on a morning 10 days after the ritual, in the open field east of the clan house, with Calder watching from a respectful distance and Cade standing at the edge of the wall. Field with his hands in his coat pockets, and the particular stillness of a man choosing not to interrupt something that needed to happen without an audience. It was not elegant. Years of suppression did not release gracefully, and the first manifestation was accompanied by considerable pain, and considerable noise, and considerable disorientation. And when it was over, she was lying in the frost-bitten grass in human form, shaking from the effort, and Calder had crossed the field, and was lying next to her in that familiar way, his great warm bulk against her side, and the Alpha King was sitting cross-legged on the ground a foot from her head, and looking at her with an expression that contained, she was now skilled enough at reading him to identify, genuine concern beneath the habitual composure. "All right," she managed. Her voice was hoarse. "That was more complicated than expected." "You did it," he said. Simple. Certain. She turned her head and looked at the sky above her, clear and cold and enormous, and she felt the wolf inside her, finally properly present, resting after the effort of its first emergence, patient as something that has waited long enough to no longer be in any hurry. She felt her own power moving through her in the even, steady way that things moved when they were in their proper channels. She felt the cold ground beneath her, and Calder's warmth against her side, and the particular quality of the silence from the man sitting 12 inches from her head, a silence that was attentive and present, and not going anywhere. "What happens next?" she said. "Practically." "You continue to develop your abilities," he said. "The archive scholars will want to meet with you. There are several months of work to fully document the bloodline restoration." He paused. "I will need to return to the crown seat within the fortnight. There is ongoing business that has been held as long as it can be." Another pause. "I would like you to come with me." She turned her head and looked at him. He was looking at the sky above them both. "That is a significant thing to ask," she said. "Yes," he said. He turned and looked at her, and they were very close, closer than they had been before except for the black moon circle, and his expression was the open one, the unguarded one. "It is a significant thing to ask. I am aware of that." He paused. "I am asking anyway." She thought about the clan house, her narrow room and the east wall and the bucket of ash water and the invisible life she had built so carefully across 2 decades. She thought about all the care she had taken to manage expectations, to not hope for things that were not available to her, to make herself small enough to fit in the space she had been given. She thought about the locked door, which was no door at all now. Nothing in the place where the barrier had been except the open and continuous presence of herself, full and whole, and no longer edited. She thought about what it had felt like. To place her hand on Calder's head on a cold morning in a courtyard and feel the extraordinary warmth of something ancient, choosing her without explanation. "All right," she said. He turned to look at her, and the almost smile was more than almost this time, and it was directed at her, and she held it in the center of her chest like something she was not going to drop. Calder made his sound, deep and resonant and carrying, and it moved through the cold morning air and across the field, and it said the same thing it had said in the Black Moon Circle, in the wordless language of very old and very certain things. These two, this bond, this truth. The morning after the decision was made, Sarah stood in the courtyard one last time before the preparations for departure began, in the same place she had stood when Calder crossed the stones to find her. The clan house was still and gray in the early light, and the frost was on the stones, and the sky above was the pale, colorless blue of early autumn mornings, and she stood there and felt her wolf inside her, quiet and present and immense. And she felt her power in her hands, the silver warmth of it, and she let herself feel all of it without editing any of it into something smaller or safer. 23 years of learning to be invisible. And the irony was that the thing that had finally made her visible was not anything she had done or proven or demonstrated. It was simply what she had always been. It had always been there. The locked door had never changed what was behind it. Roland came out to see them off with the dignity he had maintained throughout, shaking the Alpha King's hand with the formality of a man honoring his obligations to the crown. And his eyes, when they found Sarah, had something in them that she chose to regard not as regret exactly, but as a form of acknowledgement, which was more than she had expected, and perhaps as much as she was going to get, and she decided it was sufficient. Lena was not there. Lena had been gone for 4 days. She mounted the horse beside Calder, who was large enough that her horse was visibly uncertain about the proximity, and she had to spend a moment reassuring it with a quiet word and her hand on its neck, and she heard from behind her a very low sound of amusement from the Alpha King, and turned to see that the almost smile had become a full one, and the full smile was a revelation, quiet and warm and entirely different from what his public face suggested was possible. And she thought about all the things she did not yet know about him, and felt something that was not anxiety about the not knowing, but something closer to anticipation. She turned her horse toward the gate. Calder fell into step at her left. The morning opened out before them, wide and cold, and full of everything that had not yet happened. "Ready," Cade said, and it was not quite a question. She thought about the word, ready. She thought about what it meant to be ready, whether ready was something you arrived at or something you decided, whether she had been ready for years inside the locked door and simply not had permission to be, whether readiness was perhaps the same thing as knowing your own name and being willing to answer to it. "Yes," she said. She said it without hesitation. The gate was open. The road beyond it was long and pale in the early light, stretching out toward the crown seat and the archive and the beginning of everything that came next. And she rode. Through it with her wolf resting warm and present inside her, and the Alpha King at her right, and Calder's vast black shadow at her left, and the morning received them without ceremony, the way mornings do, simply being there and being real and requiring nothing from her except her presence in it. Behind her, the courtyard of the Voss clan house stood empty and still, the stones swept clean, the east wall washed, the bucket set in its proper place on its proper shelf, and there was nothing there. Any more, except the echo of a girl who had spent 23 years becoming invisible, and had turned out to be, all along, exactly what she was. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming?